What do Bibles, new shoes, and shellfish have in common? You're about to find out on this episode of Forgotten Felonies.
Welcome back to Forgotten Felonies. I'm Monica.
And I'm Olivia.
And this is where we take you back in time to rediscover the tales of vintage villainy that time forgot. This is the second episode following the story of Edmund Creffield and the cult that he started in Corvallis, Oregon in 1902 and 1903. If you want the beginning of the story, you need to go back to the episode entitled Edmund Creffield and the Rise of the Army of Holiness.
Here are the highlights. In the beginning, they called their church the Army of Holiness, or the Holiness Mission. And as members of this Army of Holiness, they refer to themselves as God's Anointed. Outsiders call them the Holy Rollers and referred to the whole thing as rollerism or Creffieldism. Edmund Creffield claimed to be a prophet of God, receiving messages directly from the Almighty and the Holy Ghost. He had 3 fellow apostles, Lee Campbell, Samson Levins, and Charles Brooks. Edmund called himself Joshua, and that is what the members called him as well. In fact, the newspapers quite often referred to him as Joshua Creffield rather than Edmund. He and his apostles were eventually tarred and feathered in January of 1904 by a group of 20 whitecaps in the town of Corvallis. And then Edmund married Maud Hurt the very next morning while still smelling like pine tar. Then he and Maud moved up to Hood River to start a new sect there. Donna Starr's husband found out that there was some sexual relations between Edmund and his female followers, so he pressed criminal adultery charges. Edmund went into hiding underneath the home of his followers in Corvallis, and was found 4.5 months later.
And while all of that took up an entire episode, that was only the beginning. When O.V. and Chief Lane got to the house with Roy Robinette, O.V. called Edmund's name several times until he finally got an answer. Then O.V. crawled underneath the house to talk to him and to tell him to come out. Here's how O.V. described what happened.
When I went under the house after Creffield, he would not at first come out. I said, "Come out of there," and he finally came. And as he crawled towards me from under the building, he was the most frightful-looking human being I ever beheld. His white hair stood out from his head in all directions, as did also his long white beard, and both were filled with dirt. His body was nude, his nails long, and his whole person filthy. I had to grip my teeth to keep off of him. If he had been well, and a man, but if a dirty, sick dog came and crouched at your feet, you could not kick it, and I could not kick him.
He was so weak from lack of food and exercise, he couldn't even stand on his own. O.V. and Chief Lane had to dress him in some clothes from the house, and when the buggy arrived, they had to hold him up on either side to get him into it. Edmund Creffield was officially lodged in the Benton County Jail at 10:45 a.m. on July 29, 1904. They finally had their man. D.A. Manning in Portland was notified of the capture, and he said he'd be sending Detective Lou Hartman down to Corvallis the following morning. On the night of July 29, 1904, 4 men arrived in Corvallis by train. One of these men was Bert Starr, the man who was pressing the adultery charges. He took his 3 companions with him over to O.V.'s house and suggested that they put together a mob to overrun the county jail, take Edmund Creffield from his cell, and hang him. O.V. said there would be none of that, and that's where the plan stopped. On that following morning, July 30th, Edmund ate a hearty meal, he shaved, he had a haircut and a bath, and he was visited by Dr. Pernod in the jail. But Edmund told him,
"It is not a doctor that I want. The Lord is my doctor."
Now, it's at this point in the story where I start to see O.V. Hurt in a different sort of light.
How so?
Okay, so O.V.'s wife is in the insane asylum at this point, as are all 3 of his biological children, Maud, Frank, and May. All 4 of them have been taught that O.V. is an outsider, and therefore it is sinful to interact with him in any way. They call him the Black Devil. Now, all of O.V.'s furniture has been destroyed because of Edmund. I mean, Edmund completely turned O.V.'s life upside down, and yet O.V. visits Edmund in the jail, both on July 29th and July 30th, before being taken to Portland, and not just once on each of those days.
Good glory. Was he there to yell at him?
No, that's the thing. He took pity on him because he was so sick and pitiful, really. So he was there to be kind to him, to like be his support, because he had no family in the area and all of his friends were in asylums. So OV was there like as his only support. So yeah, it's crazy because as this story goes on, it seems like OV is everybody's father figure. It's very interesting. So you'll see as we go. In the early afternoon of July 30th, Edmund was escorted out of the county jail and walked a few blocks over to the train. Detective Hartman had come down from Portland to pick him up and to take him back. Because of his condition and to avoid any sort of danger that might await him, they had asked the train to stop a few blocks away from the station to pick up the passenger. He still had no strength and very little energy and needed assistance to walk even that short distance. A crowd of about 100 people had gathered just to catch a glimpse of him. When Edmund and Detective Hartman arrived in Portland, it was about 6 o'clock in the evening. First, he was taken to the city jail, but because of his condition, they decided to send him to the county jail, where he'd be able to have a cell by himself and he'd have a cot to lay on, and it would just be better for his recovery. A reporter from the Oregonian paid him a visit that night, and Edmund refused to answer questions. He did say,
I am Elijah. I am doing as the Lord ordered me to do. I know they tried to kill me. They will try it again. If the Lord wants me killed, I will die.
But most of the time, he answered all questions with,
I am Elijah.
So, if you don't know, Elijah is an important prophet in the Old Testament of the Bible. According to the biblical story, he lived in the 9th century BC and was known for fiercely defending the worship of the God of Israel during the time when many people had turned to other gods. Elijah is remembered for performing miracles, challenging false prophets, and calling people back to faith. In the Bible, he doesn't die in the usual way. Instead, he is said to have been taken up into heaven in a whirlwind on a chariot of fire. Because of this, some religious traditions believe Elijah could return again, which made claims of being Elijah especially powerful and controversial.
See, I don't know Bible stories.
I do.
All right. So the day he arrived at the county jail in Portland, it just so happened to be a Sunday, and 2 ministers stopped in front of his cell. One of them said to him,
You have done wrong and you should repent. You should get this crazy idea of religion out of your head.
He then very loudly said,
I am not crazy. I am Elijah.
Meanwhile, back at the state insane asylum in Salem, the physicians now had a whole lot of hope that the holy rollers in their charge would get better. They had come in saying that Joshua had assured them that it would be impossible for officers to arrest him. Now this was proven untrue, so there was hope that they would realize maybe he wasn't a prophet after all. They decided that the staff at the asylum wouldn't be the ones to break the news. They would allow them to find out from other patients as they found out. So just let them find out in other ways. Because they wanted the holy rollers, the patients, to contemplate it on their own. They got it from somewhere else, so it can't be the staff just trying to mess with them, So give them some time to kind of chew on it for a minute. Well, the July 31st, 1904 edition of the Sunday Oregonian says that their, quote, peculiar religious beliefs had not even been mentioned to them by the staff at all while they were there, other than when they had to compel them to dress and wear their hair like other people do.
Because, as a reminder, back in 1904, women wore elaborate dresses, fancy hats, and their hair was pinned up. Men also always wore hats. Edmund's followers were taught to wear the bare minimum because clothing was too good and made them proud. Proud people can't get close to God.
Yep. So Edmund now, obviously being who he is, he really wanted a Bible in his cell. That is all he wanted. And he had even told Detective Hartman that he would tell the entire story behind the adultery charges if he could just have a Bible. So Hartman said, well, I'll try to get you one, but it didn't come through. But O.V. Hurt traveled from Corvallis up to Portland to visit Edmund, and it was O.V. that provided him with a Bible for his cell.
You know, in episode 1, I was really rooting for OV at the end. Now it's like, what are you doing?
He's like, there. You ruined my life, but here you go. You should be comfortable.
I won't ruin yours.
Yeah. I'm turning the other cheek, Joshua.
See, I'm not proud.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it just sounds like he's trying to take care of him and, it's like he's there to support him and make sure he has what he needs. And that's why OV just really seems like this father figure to me. And I mean, it goes on. There's more. So you'll see.
Well, because of marriage, OV is his father-in-law.
That's true, but I really don't think that has anything to do with it. While OV was in town, a reporter went to the jail to see Edmund, and this time we got some really good quotes straight from Edmund's mouth. He was first asked,
"What is your trade?" "I am a minister of the gospel."
The reporter then explained what he'd meant by trade, and Edmund told him that he was a laboring man and he used to work on farms. Then he added,
"I am still a laboring man, working in the Lord's vineyard." "How long have you been working in the Lord's vineyard?" "Let me think. I do not like to answer a question of such importance as that without thinking first."
He took a full minute just looking at the opposite wall while thinking, and then he said,
"It must be about 6 months. Then I received the light that I was called to go forth for the Master." "How did you receive the light?" "It came to me mentally at first and then went into my heart, where I gained spiritual knowledge. Then I knew I was Joshua. Others received the same light and came and told me I was the appointed one."
Then he was asked if he was guilty of the adultery charges, and that's when his face flushed red and he was angry, and he said,
"Poor benighted people, they are all in the dark."
It was that same day, Monday, August 1st, 1904, that Edmund was taken to what they called police court. And this is when he was officially arraigned on that charge of adultery. He arrived at 11 o'clock a.m., and he had to be held up by Bailiff Goltz, and he was trembling horribly because he just didn't have any muscle tone at all. And the courtroom was overflowing with people. When the judge said that he would appoint an attorney for Edmund, he refused, and he said that God would plead his case for him.
"You would better secure someone on earth to defend you. I'm afraid I can't hear God."
He continued to refuse an attorney and said he would represent himself with God's help. That help came to him 2 days later on August 3rd. The Lord had appeared to him in a vision and told him that all he had to do was plead not guilty and then go to court and tell the entire truth during the trial. He said,
"The people are all in the dark, and I have been commanded to lead them to light. They are in the wilderness of sorrow and sin. And what they deem sin is virtue, and what they deem virtue is sin."
Once the people in the courtroom heard the entire truth, their eyes would be open and they would see that he truly is Joshua or Elijah or whatever other flavor he might claim to be that day. Oh, by the way, the day before that, he was visited by a member of the Salvation Army, and Edmund told him that he was in fact the Moses sent by God to lead the people of the world out of darkness.
So we got 3 different flavors, 3 different prophets, all mixed into one. I mean, past lives.
On August 4th, there was a court hearing. Just before the hearing, he said,
"I am now Joshua, high priest, and at some future time I will become Elijah, the restorer. My work is to lead the 12 tribes of Israel back to Jerusalem, where the restoration of all things will take place and the millennium will dawn on earth."
He went on to say that it was while he was under the Hurt residence that he was being prepared for his future work, which is to restore Israel to Jerusalem. It wasn't until Wednesday, August 24th, that Edmund was able to put in his plea. He pleaded not guilty, of course, but it's funny because the Eugene Register Guard wrote that Edmund tried to throw a hypnotizing smile at the judge, and the judge declined to receive it. So
what is that? No thanks.
I know. Hypnotize the hand.
No. I rebuke thee.
Yeah. I don't know. But yeah, so this is relevant because the papers all over the place were convinced that he had hypnotic powers, and that's how he got these people to do all of these weird things. And according to a man named William Crabtree with the Salvation Army, Edmund actually studied a book about hypnotism while he was a member of their church. A man who was referred to only as a man who has known Creffield's history from the day he first came into this section of the country, some 5 or 6 years ago. And I assume that it was still the same guy, William Crabtree. But he told a reporter at the Oregon Daily Journal that Edmund had trained for the priesthood in Germany. And while he was in school for that, like in training for that, he made a particular study of mental telepathy and became something of an expert in the science of thought transference.
If thought transference sounds familiar, it should! When we covered Hans Schmidt, my favorite, the bloodlust priest, we found out that he also studied thought transference while he was in training to become a Catholic priest.
It really makes one wonder about what was going on with Catholicism in Germany in the early 1900s.
Hans had failed to be ordained with his class, so he left for a while and tried to strike it rich by helping university students ace their tests. He was going to transfer thoughts of the correct answers into their heads while they took the test so they would pass. He got arrested for that, actually.
Yes, he went to jail for that, and you can go and listen to those episodes for all the details.
Every juicy, gory detail.
And they're terrible. They're really terrible. I encourage you not to listen unless you're over 18 and you have a, really strong stomach. All right. Anyway, I wonder if Hans and Edmund knew each other or went to the same priesthood training church place. I just really wish I had more information about Edmund's background in Germany. But anyway, as far as the Salvation Army was concerned, Edmund really was pulling all of this off, getting these otherwise rational women to follow him to the ends of the earth with mind control techniques. As always seems to have happened a century ago, the trial went very quickly. It took place on Friday, September 16th, before Judge Sears. The prosecution called up Donna Starr to ask her about the adultery, and she said that yes, she had done it, and it was because she was inspired by God for the purging of her soul of devils. And she testified that she knew it was the right thing to do. Well, Mrs. Coral Worrell was also called by the prosecution, and this is when she said that she and her husband had, been members of this church right up until they learned about that objectionable doctrine, and that's when they left. She also revealed that the group had a different name. The real name of this, quote, church is Bride of Christ. So that is singular. It's just bride rather than brides. And she said that Edmund was the apostle. So I just want to point out this cult is known as the Brides of Christ cult, but this was actually the first time that the name was made public. So I found that very interesting. Anyway, so Mrs. Worrell's husband, J.F. Worrell, he also testified, and so did Lewis Hartley, whose daughter Sophia was still sitting in the state insane asylum in Salem. Lewis Hartley, he's the very wealthy guy who managed, the mining operations in Bohemia mines, and his wife, Cora Hartley, was also driven mad by the Bride of Christ doctrine, but Lewis was watching her himself rather than having her committed. Now, when it was time for the defense, Edmund simply stood on the witness stand and addressed everyone in the courtroom. He quoted scripture a lot, and he told of how he got to Corvallis in the first place. He said,
"Among my converts was this woman. It was all an individual matter, a matter of conscience, as she has told you. God teaches us that we must have direct connection with him before we can be saved."
He quoted more from the Bible, and he said it was necessary to purge the body like Donna had said. Judge Sears then asked,
"You don't claim to be God, do you?" "No, but one had to have direct connection with him. God called me to do all I have done, and I am obeying him." The gospel he put on me was to purge the body, and I have done so. Jesus Christ, I tell you, has chosen me to purge the flesh from sin of all those who are willing. You admit this crime, then? Yes, in the eyes of the world I am guilty, but God is on my side.
By 11:30 in the morning, after 15 minutes of deliberation, Edmund Creffield was found guilty of adultery. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, he was sentenced to the maximum allowed under the law, which was 2 years in the state penitentiary. After receiving his sentence, he simply said,
God bless you.
on his way out of the courtroom doors, he said,
Glory to Jesus, glory to God.
it just makes me laugh. And by that night, he was sleeping in his new cell at the Oregon State Penitentiary. When Edmund got to the prison, he was assigned a job in the stove foundry. He was very well behaved in prison, and he didn't try to preach to or convert any of his fellow inmates, which really surprises me. I wonder if he was afraid of them because he was like 5'3" and very small. And there were some dangerous guys back then in the prison. The staff and doctors at the insane asylum thought for sure that the hypnotic spell would be broken when he was caught and imprisoned, but it was still taking some time to get the believers to snap out of it. Maud Hurt, the daughter of O.V. and Sarah Hurt, she was discharged on November 24th, 1904. Her mother, Sarah, had gone home a little while previously, but she, Sarah, was still completely insane, and the doctors told O.V. that there was very little hope of her recovery. Frank Hurt, the son of O.V. and Sarah Hurt, he was to be sent home on Monday, December 5th. His wife, Molly, would be released as well. They had all renounced the teachings of Edmund Creffield and were back to normal. There was a reporter in Corvallis who spoke to them after they were released, and they all told the reporter that they felt like they were waking up from an awful dream, and that was just proof to the world that he must really have been a hypnotist, because why else would it feel like that? So the women, they were no longer throwing aside their good clothing. They were putting their hair up. They were wearing hats. They were being good, sane girls, in 1904 standards. And the December 9th newspaper article said that the women were, quote, evincing true feminine desire for stylish apparel, wear modish headgear, and otherwise show a healthy frame of mind, being also rapidly improving in physical health. By March of 1905, every one of Edmund's believers had left the various asylums, and they were considered cured, mostly. Apparently, Maud had gone into a serious siege of illness in the asylum, and they said it was like a hysterical trance. And when she recovered from that, that's when she was cured, and she was over the whole Bride of Christ fiasco. So she just kind of went super extra insane and then just snapped out of it and got it out of her system. Sophia Hartley, the daughter of the Bohemia Mines guy, she was the last holdout in the state insane asylum. She was still sticking to the religion for 2 weeks after everyone else had left. And in fact, when they told her that everyone else had forsaken the religion and left, she refused to believe it. She thought they were lying. So one day, Maud came to visit her. And Sophia wouldn't even believe them that Maud was in the waiting room because she, was like, she didn't even leave. You're just all liars. Well, eventually she went in and she saw how pretty Maud looked with her regular dress on. And she had a beautiful hat and her hair was done. And after talking to Maud, Sophia snapped out of it and she went home the next day. Imagine that. Now, fast forward to May 25th of 1905. Maud Hurt Creffield files for divorce. And so it looks like she really has come around. And at this time, Edmund has been in prison for about 8.5 months. Well, at the beginning of July, Edmund was on a work crew doing some road work. And by doing all of this work, he was earning good time to be deducted from his sentence. While the work crew was working on this road, they came upon an open-air Quaker group. So Quaker, religious people, and they were outside for whatever reason. Now, Edmund went ahead and started preaching a sermon to these Quakers, and they were all enthralled, and they thought, who is this amazing man? So they asked some questions like the next day or over the next couple days to find out, like, who was that? And they found out that it was, in fact, the high priest of the Holy Rollers. They were like, oh no, quick, take a shower. No, just kidding. So yeah, I guess they saw how easy it is to get sucked into a cult because they were immediately taken by this man. On December 13th, 1905, Edmund Creffield was released from prison. He had served about 15 months of that 24-month sentence. And as they did for all parolees, they gave him $5 and they sent him on his way. Now, the whole point of putting someone in prison is to give them a stiff consequence in hopes that, they'll make better choices in the future. I personally would set aside my aspirations to be a cult leader if it resulted in a 2-year prison sentence, but Creffield did not see his time in prison as a defeat. In fact, he interpreted it as something much more dramatic. While he had once claimed to be Joshua, and sometimes Elijah, calling himself the Moses that God sent to the people, now he was telling followers something even bigger. Creffield began saying that his imprisonment had been a kind of death, and that his release from prison was his resurrection. And in other words, he is now claiming to be the second coming of Christ. And his core set of followers believed every single word, every syllable even, without question, without doubt. As far as the Hertz, the Hartleys, Donna Starr, Esther Mitchell, and the Seeleys were concerned, Jesus was walking the earth again in the form of a 5'3", 130-pound, half-bald, white-haired fellow with a thick German accent.
And they were so close to freedom. But sounds about right.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I picture when I envision the return of Christ. Anyway, as for followers who had already believed that he was a prophet sent directly by God, this was not as unbelievable as it might sound to us today. If Creffield truly was the chosen one, then perhaps prison had simply been part of God's plan. So it made perfect sense to them. And so, if his release was a resurrection, then the mission was just getting started.
Say, kids, you'll open your blinkers, I bet. The widest you ever have opened them yet. When you hear the true tale of your pal Goo Goo Bear, a telling of things in that photo up there. You see, Pa went hunting, and Ma, she got gay, the minute the old man was out of the way. With dignified credit, to Powers she went, and ticked up 100, just like an old cent. For table and china, a buffet and sitch, like swell things you read of in homes of the rich. When I coaxed, she asked Lulu, my best girl, to dine, and the spread she put up, you bet, kids, was fine. Perhaps Pa won't kick, but Ma will say, honey, Powers, the store that saves you money.
When he was released from prison, he headed south to California to start over and create a new church. According to Creffield, he spent the first month or so of 1906 preaching in San Francisco, then in Sacramento, before eventually making his way north to Seattle.
But when I started digging through ship manifests a couple days ago, I found something that we both found very interesting. There's an entry for a man listed as E. Creffield, arriving in Victoria, British Columbia on February 27th, 1906, aboard the steamship Princess Beatrice. The age listed was 32, which matches Edmund Creffield almost exactly.
Now, at first, I thought that this might mean he had gone all the way back to Germany and was now re-entering the United States. So I was thinking maybe that whole, I went to California thing was completely a lie. But The sheer travel time involved would make it pretty implausible that he went to Germany. Because if he left right after his release on December 13th of 1905 and returned in February of 1906, he wouldn't have been able to spend a whole lot of time in Germany because the trip itself takes, weeks to get there and to get back. But then I looked into the ship itself. The Princess Beatrice wasn't a transatlantic vessel at all. It was a coastal steamer that ran regular passenger routes between ports in the Pacific Northwest, places like Seattle, Victoria, Vancouver, and other coastal towns. So ships like this one carried all sorts of passengers moving between cities along the coast. Regular workers, families, missionaries, religious revivalists, and traveling preachers. So if that passenger really was Edmund Creffield, it likely means that by late February of 1906, he was already moving quietly around the Puget Sound region, traveling between coastal cities by ship. Which becomes especially interesting when you consider what was happening with his former followers at exactly the same time. Because in February of 1906, strange things started happening again in Corvallis. The Corvallis Gazette-Times later reported that, likely from the very day of his release, Creffield had begun a clandestine correspondence with former members of the group. His letters were first sent to the Seeley sisters, Rose and Florence, who lived in Oregon City, and then they remailed them to the followers in Corvallis. And by February, the effects of those letters were beginning to show. The paper wrote that there were new though slight manifestations of rollerism. So in other words, the movement that everyone thought had died when Creffield went to prison was starting to stir again. Now we know that Sarah and Maud Hurt went to visit Frank Hurt, so Sarah's son, Maud's brother, and his wife Molly, who by February of 1906 were living in Seattle. This was at some point in February, and then toward the end of February, Esther Mitchell, who had been staying with Frank and Molly, went to visit Sarah, O.V., Maud, and May Hurt down in Corvallis. When the behavior of the members started to become alarming again, husbands and fathers started digging into it, and that's when the letters were found. And there was nothing they could really do. And before they even knew what was happening, everything snowballed out of control like a runaway train, and it just could not be stopped. Maud made her way back to Seattle, again by the beginning of April, and on April 4th of 1906, she and Edmund Creffield exchanged vows once more, so they were again man and wife, and on the marriage certificate, Maud is listed as being 25 and Edmund is listed as being 32. Frank and Molly Hurt served as the witnesses to this marriage, just as they had the previous time they got married in January of 1904.
It's wild that that happened almost 120 years ago.
What
Their marriage, April 4th, 1906.
We interrupt this program with a special breaking news alert. This morning, April 18th, 1906, the city of San Francisco suffered a devastating earthquake measuring an estimated 7.9 on the Richter scale. The shock struck at approximately 5:12 a.m., sending buildings crashing to the ground and splitting streets apart across the city. Reports describe widespread destruction, with homes, businesses, and public buildings reduced to rubble within moments. In the aftermath of the quake, fires have broken out across San Francisco and continue to rage out of control, consuming entire neighborhoods, as efforts to contain them struggle against broken water lines and damaged infrastructure. Authorities fear that the loss of life will be catastrophic, with early estimates suggesting that thousands may be dead. Rescue efforts are underway, but communication remains limited, and the full extent of the disaster is not yet known. We will continue to bring updates as more information becomes available. We now return you to your regularly scheduled programming.
As news of the destruction in San Francisco spread across the West Coast, people were trying to make sense of what had just happened. Entire neighborhoods had been reduced to rubble, fires were still raging, and thousands were feared dead. But Edmund Creffield already had an explanation. He told his followers that the earthquake was not a natural disaster at all, that he had caused it. That as Jesus Christ, he had condemned the city of San Francisco for rejecting him. And then he issued a warning. He said that the same fate was coming for Portland and for Corvallis, that those cities too would soon be destroyed for their rejection of him. And if his followers wanted to survive, then they needed to leave immediately. And within days, they began to leave. Not all at once, not in a single group, but quietly in small clusters, they just started disappearing. So he said that their new place of refuge would be in the vicinity of a little coastal town called Waldport, Oregon. On April 20th, Frank and Molly Hurt, traveling with their 4.5-month-old baby girl, Ruth, boarded the Corvallis and Eastern Railroad and headed west toward Uquina City, Oregon. And with them were 2 other women. I don't know for sure who they are, but it was most likely one of them would have been Molly's sister, Olive Sandell. The following day, another group made their move. Maud, Edmund, Cora Hartley, and Sophia Hartley all headed over. But Edmund was being especially careful. He didn't want to be seen anywhere near Corvallis because you remember he had been tarred and feathered and told, if we ever catch you again, we're going to hang you. And so he was like, I'm going to not set foot over there. So instead of taking the train from Seattle down through Portland and into Corvallis before heading to the coast, he and Maud got off the train in the community of Airlie in Polk County and then paid $6 for a buggy and a team of horses, which was actually double what it would have cost if they had taken the train. And they slipped out to a remote stop in Wren, Oregon, which is a very quiet place where fewer eyes would be watching. Wren was actually in Benton County, but it was just a very remote place where people from Corvallis likely wouldn't be. But when I looked it up on a map, they're only 20 miles apart. And apparently, when he arrived at the station in Wren, that's where they got onto the train, he was wearing these really old, tattered, awful clothes when he arrived there on the, with the horses and stuff. And then he slipped into a grove of trees and changed and came out looking spiffy. So they were like, it was probably, the old clothes were probably a disguise or something. So anyway, from Wren, they caught that train west to the coast, and other followers were making their way too. Now, some of them by train and some of them on foot. You guys, I am not making this up. 18-year-old Esther Mitchell, the younger sister of Donna Starr, she walked from Corvallis, more than 80 miles, by herself, to the coast. I don't think you understand. She's going over a mountain range, guys. She walked. On April 21st, she passed through Wren the very same day that Edmund and the others had been there, but she was not with them, just the same day she walked through. But she was making the journey on her own, step by step, toward the place that Creffield had told them all to go. The train's final stop would be at Uquina City, Oregon, and the Bride of Christ members would figure out where to go from there. That was just their initial gathering place.
Uquina City, Oregon was once a busy little boomtown tucked along the edge of Uquina Bay, just east of present-day Newport. In the 1880s, it was built up as the end of the railroad line from Corvallis, a place where passengers and cargo would transfer between trains and steamships heading down the coast. For a time, it thrived, with hotels, shops, and a steady flow of people passing through. At its peak, there were as many as 8 trains per day carrying people from the Willamette Valley over to Uquina City, where the beachgoers would then board the steamship Uquina, which would take them across the Uquina Bay to Newport. But this boomtown's boom didn't last. By the early 1900s, Uquina City was already fading, its brief moment of promise slipping quietly into the past.
Yeah, so like you, prior to this, I had never heard of Uquina City, but I have driven past Uquina Bay.
Which makes sense, because they were going to Waldport.
Yes, they were. Well, making the way from Corvallis to Uquina City by foot was not an easy journey. The route from Corvallis to the coast meant miles of muddy wagon roads through the Willamette Valley, slick with, spring rain and carved deep by wagon ruts. Beyond that lay the Coast Range, steep, forested mountains with narrow, winding trails cutting through dense stands of fir and underbrush. The ground would have been wet and uneven, roots and rocks hidden beneath the mud, with creeks and rivers to cross along the way. I mean, there was a lot. So it was the kind of journey that could take days, obviously, it's like 80 plus miles, through terrain that was as isolating as it was unforgiving. And the forests that she walked through, they were not empty. They were home to black bears, cougars, and wolves. I kid you not. And encounters between humans and these animals were rare, but for someone who's traveling alone, an 18-year-old girl all by herself, just walking across the mountains, the danger's there, that would be scary. But still, Esther made that journey alone. So now she was able to just go. Nobody stopped her, but not everyone was willing to let the women go as easily. So Cora Hartley's husband, Lewis Hartley, realized just in the nick of time that his wife and daughter, Sophia Hartley, were leaving. And he rushed to the train and he managed to board the very same train that they were on. And at some point along the way, they noticed him. But when the train stopped in Blodgett, they slipped off quietly, disappearing and taking shelter at a nearby home. So Lewis Hartley had no idea they got off the train, and he continued on to Yaquina City, only to realize too late that he lost them. But he wasn't finished. This just further angered him. Hartley boarded the Yaquina steamship, and he made his way across the Yaquina Bay to Newport, where he purchased a revolver and ammunition. Edmund, Maud, and the others hadn't yet crossed the Yaquina Bay by the time that Lewis Hartley was making his way back over to Yaquina City. By the time the cult members began crossing Yaquina Bay towards South Beach, Hartley had armed himself, and he spotted Edmund on another boat that was just starting to leave the dock. So Lewis jumped from one dock to the other, and he raised his revolver and pulled the trigger. Once, twice, 5 times, and nothing happened. So it turns out that Hartley had purchased a center fire weapon and loaded it with rim fire cartridges. So, yeah. Now, he had been just feet away from Edmund as the boat pulled away, attempting to shoot him at very close range, and Edmund would be dead if the gun had gone off. So Edmund Creffield was lucky to be alive, and he likely knew it. However, this worked in his favor, because now it was proven to him and all of the brides of Christ that he could not be killed. He was a holy man. He was Christ. He was untouchable.
Made in Oregon is the slogan. We want the maid of Oregon, as well as her father, brother, or mother, to call at this office when in need of any dental work. There is nothing too good for Oregon or Oregon people, especially the maids of Oregon, our best and loveliest product. To preserve the beauty of our girls, the teeth must receive careful attention. If you will entrust with us your work, we will handle your case with the greatest skill and gentleness. We will spare your nerves, and the dental office will have no more terror for you. Dr. B.E. Wright, the painless dentist.
It was the next day, April 22nd, when Cora and Sophia Hartley, who were still on foot, made their way to Eddyville. And this was actually their halfway point in that walk from Blodgett, Oregon, over to Yaquina City. So they just had 20 more miles to go. They asked Mr. M.D. Welton for lodging in Eddyville that Sunday night, and the following morning they left before anyone else was awake. Now, I didn't see an official report, but I would assume that they reached Newport by that same night, and then they would have had to turn south and walk quite a bit further down the coast, because the little cult was camping at 10 Mile Creek, which is about 34.5 miles south of Newport.
When you drive south down the Oregon coast from Newport, you first go through the small town of Waldport, then the small town of Yachats, and then eventually you reach a fairly large coastal town called Florence. The location of their camp, by the mouth of 10 Mile Creek, would have been around 6.5 miles south of Yachats.
I was so excited to find that information because I had read a book about this cult several years back, and it said that they stayed in a cave just south of Yachats, but it didn't say where. And the actual newspapers from 1906 do not mention a cave at all. Like, no caves whatsoever. That word literally is not printed anywhere in relation to this story. They do mention a few different spots where they camped. And so I want to take a road trip. But the information about this campsite was actually conveyed to people in Corvallis on Saturday, April 28th, by a man who had been over on the coast and had just returned to Corvallis. He also told them about Lewis Hartley's attempt at shooting Edmund, but he said Lewis was actually currently really sick over in Waldport and he couldn't travel home at that time.
I wonder if he knew that his wife and daughter were just 15 miles south.
You know, he probably had heard word of it. If he knew that guy who went back to Corvallis and he's talking about the camp, like I would assume he had heard. But when the authorities in Corvallis, as well as the authorities in Newport, heard about this close call assassination, the attitude was just, well, I'm sure someone will shoot him soon.
It was a given. It was gonna happen.
Yeah. So something else crazy happened on April 28th. Donna Mitchell Starr up in Portland, she's been back with her husband, right? She wanted a new pair of shoes. Now, at this time, Donna and Bert had 3 kids. They had 5-year-old Gertrude, 3-year-old Rachel, and 7-month-old Clifford. Donna was seemingly back to her old self. However, she still insisted that Joseph Creffield was a true prophet, and of course, his teachings were the real deal. She even told Bert that there was only one man she loved more than him, and it was Edmund Creffield. So I'm sure he loved that, considering he put Edmund in prison for having, slept with his wife. Well, on the 28th of April, Donna was being extra affectionate and lovey-dovey, and she wanted a new pair of shoes, so Bert gave her some cash to go get some. But she insisted that he go with her to the shop, so they went together and just, holding hands and all of that. Well, that night, while the family was asleep, Donna got out of bed and slipped into her brand new shoes. She paused to write a note to Bert, and then she took $3.50 from his pocket, and then away went Donna Mitchell Starr on her way back to her prophet, the return of the Savior, and to her salvation itself.
Well, Portland was supposed to have a major earthquake.
Yes, so there was a sense of urgency for her to go as soon as possible, which is another hallmark of a cult. Donna's note to her husband said,
I cannot wait until daylight because the babies would cry to go with me. I have taken about $3.50 of your money. But I guess I have been worth that much to you. It is not enough to pay my fare, and I will have to walk to the place I am going. Affectionately, Donner. Is it supposed to say Donner at the end?
Mm-hmm. And yes, I think that's kind of cute because apparently that was her nickname. He called her Donner instead of Donna. So, like a little reindeer. Just kidding. I don't think the reindeer had those names yet in 1906.
I'll look it up.
Yeah, look it up. So Donna took the train from Portland down to Corvallis, arriving on Sunday, April 29th. By Monday, April 30th, she had made it all the way into Alcee on foot from Corvallis. So that was a 30-mile walk. And from there, those brand new shoes walked her all the way to Waldport. But by the time she got there, probably on May 1st, Edmund Creffield, her beloved Joshua, the reborn Christ, was already gone.
Dead?
No, just absent. He left. So it was Sunday, April 21st when Lewis Hartley tried to shoot him, point blank, and that was apparently a little terrifying. Yeah, so it occurred to Edmund that he ought to find a new place to call Eden, and as unkillable as he might be, I think he didn't want to keep having to prove it. So I don't know the exact date that he left, but the papers say he only stayed in the coastal camp for 2 to 3 days after that, when Edmund left his followers at their camp on the coast. That would suggest that he actually left on April 23rd or 24th. Nobody to this day knows what route he took. They think that maybe he somehow made his way to Junction City first or made his way to Eugene, which is quite a ways south of the main train station in Albany, Oregon. They figured he got on a train down there, and then he went north, and then Maud joined him on the train when it stopped in Albany on the evening of May 1st. Anyway, that's what they were hoping. They were hoping that he was going to be on the train on May 1st. So Maud was all the way back from the camp, 7 miles south of Yachats, and at the Albany train station, which from there to the train station is a distance of 91 miles. There was a group of men trailing Maud at the train station, asking her for the whereabouts of her husband. She, of course, wouldn't say, and every single train that came through was stopped and searched. These men were all family members of the women who had left for the camp on the coast. One of the men was George Mitchell, who was the brother of Donna Mitchell Starr and Esther Mitchell. George looked squarely into the face of every single man on every train, determined to find the man who had ruined his sisters.
To understand why George Mitchell was so determined, we have to go back a little further. The Mitchell children had already lived through hardship long before Edmund Creffield ever entered their lives. Their father, Charles Mitchell, was born in Indiana in 1847. Their mother, Martha Goodner Mitchell, was born in Illinois in 1851. The family first lived in Illinois, but by the late 1880s, they had moved to Oregon, settling in Newburgh in Yamhill County. There were 2 reasons for that. The Mitchells were Quakers, and Newburgh was the center of the Quaker community in Oregon. And Charles Mitchell's brother was already living there. The couple had 7 children, 3 girls and 4 boys. Esther Mitchell, the youngest, was born in 1888. In December of 1894, their mother, Martha, died of tuberculosis. And then, as if that wasn't enough, their father left. Charles Mitchell returned to Indiana, leaving all 7 of his children behind in Oregon. Esther was just 6 years old. She was passed between relatives, taken in wherever there was room, and after a few years, their father stopped sending money altogether. By 1900, the 3 Mitchell daughters, Phoebe, Donna, and Esther, were living in Portland and had become deeply involved with the Salvation Army. Esther was 12 and Donna was 20. George Mitchell had been born in January of 1883. That made him about 2.5 years younger than Donna and 5 years older than Esther. When their mother died and their father abandoned them, George was around 11 years old.
And George had his own troubles, probably having a lot to do with losing both of his parents at the age of 11. On May 18th of 1901, at the age of 18, he was sent to prison for burglary in Washington state. He was released on September 15th of 1903 at the age of 20. By the spring of 1906, George had seen some things, yeah? He was fiercely protective of his sisters. One had been publicly humiliated in an adultery trial, and the other, his baby sister, had been committed to an asylum because of all of this. So when George W. Mitchell walked through those train cars on May 1st, 1906, searching the face of every man, it wasn't about a strange preacher anymore. It was about his family. Maud boarded the train at 7 o'clock that evening, headed for Portland. She told the men that she was going to take rooms in a lodging house and stay there for a while. She claimed that Edmund was still at the camp in Waldport, where she had left him on Monday, April 22nd.
Wait a minute. Isn't that the day after Lewis Hartley tried to kill him?
Yes, so it sounds to me like he didn't wait 2 to 3 days, because if she left because he left, then he left the coast almost right away.
He was running scared, tail between his legs.
Yeah. That would be scary. I would probably leave as well. And from here, things go quiet in the papers. We know that in early April, when Maud and Edmund got remarried in Seattle, they also paid rent on an attic room at 1116 Fifth Avenue. The only furniture in it was 2 chairs, a cheap table, and a sleeping cot. We also know that Esther Mitchell also followed Edmund to Seattle after he left the coast and everything, but this didn't come out until about a week later that she also followed. Now, Maud didn't stop in Portland when she left Albany on May 1st, but she went all the way to Seattle, and what she didn't know was that George Mitchell was on her trail. I'm not sure if he snuck onto the same train or if he simply asked later, where her ticket was taking her, but he was definitely making plans to head north, which he did almost immediately after Maud left. The Hartley women had also come back to Corvallis from the coast. Someone named W.C. Swan swore out a complaint of mental derangement against both of them on Wednesday, May 2nd. What they said in the courtroom was pretty interesting, which is why I'm including it.
Creffield is Jesus Christ. He condemned the city of San Francisco and brought the earthquake. He has condemned the city of Corvallis, and an earthquake will destroy this place.
When asked why all of the Holy Rollers had gathered at the coast a week prior, Cora and Sophia claimed that none of the different parties had actually communicated with each other at all. Yet all of them had been given the same command by God to get on the train and go on that same day. So they did. They just simply obeyed, which is ridiculous. Anyway, they were asked why Edmund had hired a team from Airlie to drive him to the Wren station rather than taking that train through Corvallis. And they said,
Creffield, who is the Holy Ghost, has condemned Corvallis, and he never returns to a city that he has condemned. Okay, he's also the Holy Ghost. We are up to 5 flavors now. We're in Flavored Town. Joshua, Elijah, Moses, Jesus, and the Holy Ghost.
And I wonder, is apostle also a flavor?
No.
No? Okay.
Because that's a title you give someone.
Okay. That makes sense. All right. All right. So the next thing that we hear about this group is
Franz Creffield shot to death. Leader of the Holy Rollers pays penalty for betraying 2 young girls. George Mitchell kills Creffield in Seattle.
It was May 7th, 1906. On that morning, which was a Monday, George Mitchell was out on the street looking for Creffield. He had tracked him and Maud all the way to Seattle, arriving on Wednesday, May 2nd, the day after Maud had gotten on the train and headed north herself. Now it was just a matter of locating them. Well, that Monday morning, he got lucky. Edmund and Maud were out especially early, wanting to get to the shops before too many people were out. Maud probably didn't like getting all the stares from people as she walked around with her ratty old shoes and with her hair cascading down past her shoulders because it was not socially acceptable. Now, the skirt that she was wearing was tattered horribly. It was also the skirt that she'd been wearing while she was camping at the coast and, all of this stuff. I mean, really, it was the only skirt she had because they all had to burn all of their nice clothes. She also was wearing what was called a shirtwaist, which I had to Google, and it's those fancy blouses that they wore that, button-up blouses, and then they're, tight at the, corset or whatever. So anyway, I'll probably post a picture of that as well. So she was also wearing a shirtwaist, and they were on their way to buy her a new skirt when they walked together, arm in arm, down First Street. George saw them approaching around 7:10 a.m., and so he quickly ducked into an alcove in front of the Quick drugstore. And as soon as Edmund and Maud walked past his hiding place, George drew his .38 caliber revolver and shot a ball through the back of Edmund's head. It severed his spinal cord at the base of his skull. Edmund fell to the sidewalk and was dead instantly. Maud threw herself down by his side and wrapped her arms around his neck. She kissed his lips and she hysterically repeated, "He cannot die, he cannot die." She even said, "He did no harm to George Mitchell." She continued to insist that he could not die. Well, eventually, after Dr. Borries had arrived to assist, he picked Maud up to her feet and he said,
"But he is dead, madam."
George Mitchell didn't even try to run. He just stood beside the body and waited for the police to arrive. Patrolman LeCount had been nearby and actually heard the shot, so he rushed right over to the scene immediately. And George just calmly handed him the gun. Both George and Maud were taken to the police station for questioning, and Edmund's body was taken into the Quick drugstore to be examined by the doctor. As soon as George Mitchell got to the city jail, he asked if he could send a telegram, and he sent it to O.V. Hurt. And it simply said,
"I've got my man. I'm in jail here. George Mitchell.
When questioned, he told the police,
I killed him. I've been looking for Creffield and I got him. I have no regrets. I'm willing to take any punishment that is meted out to me without a whimper. I did not kill a man, I killed a brute. He obtained a devilish influence over my 2 sisters and ruined them. And I did only what any true brother would do.
In another article, George was quoted as saying,
I killed Creffield because I believed it was right for me to do so. I shall take the consequences, whatever they may be. No brother could love his sisters more than I. To have a man of the stripe of Creffield take them away from me and ruin their lives under the guise of frenzied religion was too much to bear. The more I thought of it, the more angry I became. And I resolved at the first opportunity to meet Creffield and secure my revenge. It was willed that I should meet him today, and Creffield suffered the end that he was entitled to.
The police agreed with him, and they gave him the very best cell in the jail, making sure he was as comfortable as possible. Later that morning, Burgess Ebenezer Starr, the husband of Donna Mitchell Starr, received a phone call while he was at work. He was informed that his brother-in-law, George Mitchell, had found and killed Edmund Creffield in Seattle. The papers say that Bert received the news with, quote, undisguised pleasure. And he immediately told his foreman that he had to go to Seattle right away. He was going to do everything he could to help George Mitchell's defense. And Bert wasn't the only one. The editor of the Albany Democrat-Herald also printed something saying many citizens of Albany were ready to send money up to Seattle for George's defense if he needed it. The same day as the murder, O.V. Hurt got on a train to head up to Seattle. He said he was going to take care of Maud, but also to take care of George Mitchell. He said he would pay whatever he could for the best lawyers for his defense. O.V. is quoted as saying,
God only knows the days and nights of anxiety and mental agony that have been suffered because of the work of that man, Creffield. Peaceful, happy families have been broken up. Virtuous women have been led astray. Children have been turned against parents and wives against husbands through some strange, unaccountable power this man Creffield exerted. Those who were wrong tried every possible means to protect themselves from a renewal of his detestable practices. Fathers and husbands and brothers have tried to control themselves while their loved ones were being led astray. The law could afford no protection, no remedy. And I'm not one who will say that Mitchell did wrong in taking the after into his own hands.
And then O.V. shared something else very interesting.
I cannot account for the power Creffield exerted except upon the theory of hypnotism. My family believes he is divine, and they assert that although dead, he will rise again in 3 days. The least I can hope is that they will recover from the spell which he threw over them.
More hypnotism. They really believed it back then.
They sure did. The day following the murder, George was moved to the county jail. Maud was put in the custody of Mrs. Kelly, the police matron, and she was detained as a witness. So she was essentially in police custody and could not leave. Also, on Tuesday, May 8th, 1906, there was an article printed in the Oregon Daily Journal that said that the members of the Bride of Christ Church were required to sign their names on a register in the form of a roll called the Holy Roll, and that this is why they were called the Holy Rollers. Now, this is the first time that this was ever asserted or put in print, literally ever. And so I think it's probably not true because the whole thing started, back in 1902 and 1903. So I think someone clever made that up. I personally had heard that before when I read the book, and I assumed that it was true. But since it wasn't even brought up until after Edmund was dead, and was never mentioned by members or OV or anything, I think it was just someone's wishful thinking. That same day, O.V. Hurt arrived in Seattle to start arranging a defense for George. He told reporters that as soon as he received that telegram from George, he showed it to several people, and they all said they were going to pool their money together to get him a medal. And O.V. did actually have one regret about the murder.
What was that?
He said he just wished that the murder had been committed while the two men were standing face to face.
I mean, probably because it's more honorable.
Yeah. Right. But, I mean, beggars can't be choosers. O.V. also said that he personally wasn't a big fan of murder. However, if he were someone who believed in it, then Edmund would have been dealt with a long time ago.
I agree.
And that is where we're going to end this episode. In the next episode, you will hear about the very intriguing trial and how the Seattle locals felt about the whole thing. We've also got another very shocking murder coming up, followed by a very mysterious, random, and horrific jailhouse death. And then there's also suicide. All of that is coming up in episode 3.
This case, Hans, is the gift that keeps on giving.
Oh, yes, it is.
I'm so glad Hans is tied into this.
There was a connection.
Okay, shout outs. Shout out to newspaper.com, ancestry.com, findagrave.com, pixabay.com, familysearch.com, my brother Christian.
Heck yeah. Also, there is a book called Murdering Holiness by Jim Phillips and Rosemary Gartner, and it's actually for free online. You can download it as a PDF, and it is very good, very well researched. No shame to these people at all.
A first.
So, very, very, very good.
Follow our socials. Forgotten Felonies on Facebook, Forgotten_Felonies on Instagram and Threads. You can go back on YouTube and listen and leave some comments. Send us some fan mail through the link.
Yeah.
And also email us.
Yeah. ForgottenFelonies@gmail.com. Also, I saw when I was logged into Spotify that they can actually leave comments on episodes in Spotify.
Oh.
So.
And we just got one, didn't we?
It was like maybe a month old or something, but I mean, I just saw it. But that fan who commented said that she loved that we are getting down to the actual truth of things instead of just speculations. So I think it might have been a comment on the James...
Yes,
Coiner, the Alonzo Robinson. Yeah,
yes.
That one.
That one's a doozy, though, because it was a lot of speculation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because they're like, oh, he's a serial killer. How they still have the stuff tagged, like in newspapers.com, when they clip their articles and then you can give it a tag, so you can find it later. And so many people tag him as serial killer. And it's like, he was not.
He was a cannibal.
I mean, so James Coiner, I couldn't remember if his middle initial was C or H. So I was like, because I think I saw it both ways.
I think you saw both, yeah.
Yeah.
I do have an answer about Donner.
What is it?
Donner was originally named Dunder in 1823. That was Dutch for thunder, and Bliksem is lightning Dutch.
That's cool.
The name changed to Donder in 1844, and later morphed to the German spelling Donner, which is German for thunder.
And they were already, it was like, these are the names for the reindeer?
Yeah, Donner was heavily popularized in 1949.
Oh, 1949?
Yeah, but Dunder was in 1823. Donder was 1844. Then Donner was 1949.
So, she was the first.
Yes.
That's awesome. It's good stuff.
Anyways, back to the script.